The emergency room was locked down. Armed security guards had their hands on their holsters, forming a perimeter around bed 4. Inside the curtain, a man covered in blood and grime was swinging a stolen scalpel, his eyes wide with a terror that didn't belong in a sterile hospital. The chief of surgery screamed for a sedative, but the man roared back, warning them about a perimeter breach. The police were 2 minutes out, and they weren't bringing tranquilizers. Then, Madeleine O'Connor walked in. She didn't have a weapon. She didn't have backup. She just had a secret that had been buried in the deserts of Kandahar for 15 years. She whispered 4 words, and the monster in the bed collapsed into a weeping child. This is the story of the code that saved a life. Rain lashed against the sliding glass doors of the trauma center at St. Margaret's Memorial Hospital in downtown Chicago. It was a Tuesday, typically a slow night, but the atmospheric pressure seemed to be crushing the city, bringing out the madness in its citizens. Inside the emergency department, the air smelled of wet wool, rubbing alcohol, and the metallic tang of dried blood. Doctor. Tobias Smith stood outside the trauma bay of bed 4, wiping sweat from his forehead with the back of a trembling hand. Tobias was a good doctor, Ivy League educated, with steady hands and a wall full of accolades. But he had never seen anything like the man currently occupying, or rather, holding hostage the trauma bay. "He's going to bleed out if we don't get that tourniquet reapplied," Tobias hissed to the head nurse, a formidable woman named Brenda. "The femoral artery is nicked. He's lost a pint already. Why hasn't security restrained him?" Brenda looked through the small glass window of the door. Frank tried. He has a broken wrist now. The patient moves differently. "Doctor, he's not just a drunk brawler." He took Frank down in 3 seconds using one hand. Inside the room, the patient, registered only as John Doe, crouched in the corner. He had ripped the IV lines out of his arm, leaving trails of blood snaking down his tattooed biceps. He was shirtless, his torso a road map of old scars, shrapnel burns, knife wounds, and the jagged, white lines of poorly stitched lacerations. He held a pair of surgical scissors he'd swiped from a tray in a reverse grip, the metal glinting under the harsh fluorescent lights. His eyes were the most terrifying part. They weren't glazed over with drugs or alcohol. They were hyper-alert, darting from the vent in the ceiling to the gap under the door. He was scanning for threats. He was hunting. "Get the police," Tobias ordered, his patience snapping. "I'm not losing a patient because he thinks he's Rambo. If he won't let us treat him, we sedate him. If we can't get close enough to sedate him, we let the cops tase him. He's a danger to my staff." "The police are 10 minutes out due to the storm," Brenda replied, her voice tight. "He doesn't have 10 minutes. Doctor, look at his leg." The makeshift bandage the paramedics had managed to slap on amidst the chaos of the car accident scene, a multi-vehicle pileup on I-90, was soaked through. Dark, crimson blood was pooling on the linoleum floor. The man was dying, and he was fighting the only people who could save him. Suddenly, the patient roared, a guttural sound that vibrated through the glass. "Perimeter compromised, fall back. I said fall back." He wasn't speaking to the doctors. He was speaking to ghosts. "Doctor." Smith grabbed the handle of the door. "I'm going in with the haloperidol. Frank, get your other guard. We rush him on 3. Doctor." "Don't." A soft voice cut through the tension. "Doctor." Smith spun around, standing near the nurse's station, looking tired but composed. Was Madeleine O'Connor? Madeline wasn't the head nurse. She wasn't a trauma specialist. She was a floater, a nurse who moved between geriatrics and the ER depending on staffing shortages. She was 42, with streaks of grey in her auburn hair and eyes that always seemed to be looking at something far away. She was quiet, efficient, and generally invisible to the high-ego surgeons like Smith. "Excuse me, Nurse O'Connor." Smith snapped. "Unless you have a tranquilizer dart gun in your pocket, go back to checking vitals in the waiting room." Madeline walked forward, ignoring the doctor's tone. She moved with a strange, fluid grace that didn't match her weary appearance. She stopped at the window and looked in. She watched the man in the corner, the way he breathed, the way he shielded his injured leg not just from pain, but as if protecting a tactical asset. She watched his eyes. "He's not psychotic, Doctor," Madeline said quietly. "And he's not high. He's working." "Working," Smith scoffed. "He's bleeding to death in a corner." "He's in the Korengal," Madeline murmured, almost to herself. She leaned closer to the glass. "Look at his breathing. Box breathing. 4 seconds in, 4 seconds hold, 4 seconds out. He's regulating his heart rate despite the blood loss. He's waiting for extraction." "I don't care if he's waiting for the tooth fairy," Smith shouted. "Frank on me. 3, 2. "If you go in there like that," Madeline said, her voice suddenly turning into steel, "he will kill you, and then he will bleed out, and you will have 2 bodies to explain to the board." The hallway went silent. Even the ambient noise of the ER seemed to drop away. "Doctor." Smith stared at Madeline, shocked by the sudden authority radiating from the usually passive nurse. "And what do you suggest?" "O'Connor." "A lullaby." "No," Madeline said. She unpinned her ID badge and handed it to Brenda. She took off her stethoscope and laid it on the desk. She rolled up the sleeves of her scrubs. "I suggest you let me talk to him." "Alone." "Absolutely not," Smith said. "Liability is mine." Madeline interrupted. "Give me 2 minutes. If I can't get him on the gurney, you can send in the SWAT team." She didn't wait for permission. Before Smith could grab her arm, she punched the code into the door and slipped inside the trauma bay. The moment the door clicked shut, the sound of the hospital disappeared. The room was soundproofed well enough that the screams of the ER were muffled. But inside, the silence was heavy, charged with violence. The man in the corner snapped his head toward her. The scissors raised an inch. He shifted his weight, wincing as his injured leg protested. But he didn't lower his guard. "Target acquired," he muttered, his voice raspy and dry. "Civilian or combatant identify." Madeline didn't move. She stood with her back against the door. She didn't raise her hands in the universal "I come in peace" gesture, which usually triggered combat veterans because it looked too much like surrender or deception. Instead, she kept her hands low, palms open, visible, but relaxed. She didn't look him in the eye. A direct stare was a challenge. She looked at his boots, combat boots, old ones, worn leather, laced in a specific pattern used by paratroopers to cut the laces quickly if they got hung up in a jump. "It's wet out there," Madeline said. Her voice was conversational, low, not the high-pitched, soothing nurse voice that people used on children. It was a flat, factual tone. "Mud's deep, hard to get traction." The man blinked. The non sequitur threw him off. He was expecting shouting or orders to drop the weapon. "Identify," he barked again, but the scissor tip lowered a fraction. "O'Connor," she said. "Medic, friendly." The man narrowed his eyes. He was handsome in a rugged, broken way. He looked to be in his late 30s, his face tanned and lined from years of exposure to harsh sun. "I don't know an O'Connor. What unit?" "I'm not with your unit," Madeline said, taking one very slow step forward. "I'm attached to the relief column. We're setting up a casualty collection point, but we can't secure the perimeter until you get that leg looked at." "Sergeant." She guessed the rank. He moved with too much authority to be a private, but he was too young to be a general. Sergeant was the backbone. It was usually a safe bet. The man flinched at the word sergeant. "My men," he whispered, his eyes suddenly filling with a frantic, wet sheen. "They're pinned down, in the wadi. I have to get back to the ridge. I need a radio. The comms are down. Sergeant." Madeline lied, smoothly and without hesitation. She knew she was playing a dangerous game. She was validating his delusion, stepping into his hallucination. If she messed up the details, he would see her as a spy or a threat. Atmospheric interference. The storm. She took another step. She was now 10 feet away. The smell of copper blood and old sweat was overpowering. "I need to clear the infection," she said, nodding toward his leg. "Can't march on that. You know the protocol. Maintain combat effectiveness." The man looked down at his leg. The blood was dark red, almost black in the shadows. He swayed. The adrenaline was wearing off, and the hypovolemic shock was setting in. It's just a scratch," he slurred. "I can walk." "I know you can," Madeline said softly. "But you don't have to right now. The bird is 5 minutes out. Let me patch it up before the extraction." He looked at her, searching her face for deceit. He looked at her hands. He looked at her posture. "You look," he squinted. "You look like a—" Madeline froze. "Like who?" "The angel," he whispered. "The one from the valley." Madeline's heart hammered against her ribs. She forced herself to breathe. "Let me help you, Sergeant. Put the scissors down. Use the tray." She gestured to the stainless steel tray on the counter to his right. The man hesitated. His grip on the scissors loosened. He was fading. The blood loss was critical. He took a staggering step toward the tray. "Okay," he breathed. "Okay, patch me up. Then we move." He dropped the scissors. The metal clatter was loud in the small room. Madeline didn't rush. Rushing was predatory. She walked over calmly, picked up the scissors, and placed them in her pocket. Then she reached out and took his arm. His skin was burning hot, yet he was shivering. "Sit," she commanded gently, guiding him toward the gurney. He sat heavily. The fight drained out of him, leaving just a broken, exhausted man. Madeline reached for the gauze. She pressed the intercom button on the wall with her elbow. "Doctor, Smith. He's secure. Bring the trauma kit." Slowly. The door opened behind her. "Doctor." Smith and Frank the guard rushed in, perhaps a bit too quickly. The change was instant. The moment Dr. Smith, a tall man with a dark beard, entered the man's peripheral vision, the patient didn't see a doctor. He saw a bearded man in dark clothing rushing him, an insurgent. "Ambush!" The scream tore the air. The patient, utilizing a reserve of strength that shouldn't have been physically possible, shoved Madeline aside, gentle enough not to hurt her, but firm enough to clear the space. He lunged at Dr. Smith. Frank, the guard, tackled him. They hit the floor in a tangle of limbs. The patient, despite the blood loss, got Frank in a chokehold. "Doctor!" Smith shouted for help. "No!" Madeline screamed, scrambling to her feet. "Don't hurt him." Security guards from the hallway flooded the room. They were piling on him, knees pressing into his spine, twisting his wounded leg. The man was howling now, not in English, but in a mix of curses and tactical commands. He was fighting for his life, convinced he was being captured by the Taliban. "Restrain him," Smith yelled, backing away, clutching his white coat. "Get the restraints, 10 milligrams of Haldol." Now. They were crushing him. Madeline saw the light fading from the man's eyes, not from submission, but from the sheer physical trauma of the struggle, combined with his blood loss. If they injected him with a heavy sedative while his blood pressure was this low, it could stop his heart. "Stop!" Madeline yelled, grabbing Smith's arm. "You'll kill him. His BP is bottoming out. He's killing my staff." Smith pushed her away. The patient was pinned, face pressed against the linoleum. He was sobbing now, a broken, guttural sound. "I didn't leave them," he choked out. "I didn't leave them. Don't make me say the code. Don't make me." Madeleine froze. The code. She looked at the man. She looked at the tattoo on his right shoulder blade, exposed as his shirt was torn in the struggle. It was a small, faded black dagger with a snake coiled around it. Below it were the numbers 7 to 5. The 75th Ranger Regiment. But there was something else. A small, almost invisible scar shaped like a star just above the tattoo. Madeleine's blood ran cold. She knew that scar. It wasn't a scar. It was a brand given to a very specific, off-the-books task force that operated in the Peck Valley in 2009. A task force that officially didn't exist. A task force her brother, Michael, had belonged to. She realized why the man looked familiar. He wasn't just a random soldier. She had seen his face in a photograph, a crumpled, blood-stained Polaroid that had been returned to her family in a box of personal effects after Michael's closed casket funeral. This man was Caleb Donovan, her brother's spotter. The man who was supposed to be watching Michael's back the night he died. The guards were buckling the leather straps around his wrists. Caleb was hyperventilating, his heart monitor screaming a warning. Madeleine didn't think. She didn't act as a nurse. She acted as a sister. She dropped to her knees right next to his face, ignoring the guards shouting at her to move. She put her mouth right next to his ear, close enough that her breath tickled his skin. She needed to reach the part of his brain that was locked in 2009. She needed to speak the language of the ghosts. "Caleb," she whispered. He stopped struggling for a split second. "Caleb," she said again, louder. "Listen to me." He groaned, his eyes squeezed shut. "They're everywhere." Broke the line. "The line holds," Madeleine said firmly. Then, she took a deep breath and spoke the words she had memorized from her brother's letters. The words that were never meant to be spoken by a civilian. "The shadow does not fear the dark." The effect was instantaneous and terrifying. Caleb went completely rigid. The guards felt it and braced themselves, expecting another explosion of violence. But there was no violence. Caleb opened his eyes. The wild, hunted look was gone, replaced by a profound, shattering confusion. He turned his head sideways to look at her. "For we are the night," he whispered back, completing the phrase. It was their unit's shibboleth, the call and response that confirmed you were friendly in the pitch black of a moonless raid. Madeleine nodded, tears pricking her eyes. "Stand down. Ranger, you're home. The mission is over." Caleb stared at her, his chest heaving. "Michael," he asked, his voice cracking. "Michael sent me." Madeline sobbed, slipping the lie in to save him. "He said you need to let them help you. He said the extraction is here." Caleb let out a long, shuddering breath. His muscles uncoiled. He slumped against the floor, surrendering not to the guards, but to the code. "Roger that," he whispered. "Weapons dry." He closed his eyes and went limp. "He's out," a guard yelled. "He crashed. Get him on the bed. Now." Smith barked, rushing forward with the defibrillator cart. "We've got cardiac arrest. Move, move, move." Madeline was shoved back as the medical team swarmed the body of the man who had just given up the war. She sat on the cold floor, the phrase echoing in her head, watching them shock the chest of the man who might be the only living person who knew how her brother really died. She had broken the rules. She had used the code. And now, the real drama was just beginning. "Charge to 200 clear, Doctor." Tobias Smith's voice cracked with the strain. The paddles thumped against Caleb Donovan's chest, the body convulsing violently on the gurney before falling back with a sickening, heavy slap against the mattress. Madeline watched from the corner of the trauma bay, her hands pressed over her mouth. The smell of ozone from the defibrillator mixed with the metallic scent of blood, creating a nausea-inducing cocktail. The monitor screamed a singular, high-pitched tone, flat line. "No rhythm," Brenda called out, her fingers flying over the crash cart. "Still in a systole." "Again," Smith roared. "Charge to 300. Epinephrine, 1 milligram. IV push. Don't you die on me, you son of a bitch. Not after almost breaking my wrist." Madeline felt a strange dissociation. The chaos of the room, the nurses scrambling, the security guards watching with pale faces. The floor, slick with blood, seemed to slow down. She wasn't seeing the trauma bay anymore. She was seeing a kitchen table in a small house in the suburbs of Chicago, 7 years ago. It was late. Michael was home on leave. He was different that time. He was thinner, wire-taut, and his eyes were always moving, scanning the perimeter of their own safe, fenced-in backyard. He had been drinking whiskey, something he never used to do. "You think it's just words?" "Maddie," Michael had said, tracing the rim of his glass. "But when you're out there, in the pitch, words are the only thing that separates the living from the dead. The dark is heavy. It wants to eat you. You have to remind it that you're the predator." He had grabbed her hand then, his grip bruising. "If I don't come back, if someone comes looking, and they say they were with me." "Michael, you're scaring me," she had whispered. "Listen to me," he snapped. "The unit isn't official. We don't exist on the roster, but we have a code. The shadow does not fear the dark." If they know that, they were there. If they don't, run. "Clear!" The shout snapped Madeline back to the present. Another jolt, another convulsion. Silence stretched for 3 agonizing seconds. Then beep, a pause, beep, beep. "We have a rhythm," Brenda exhaled, her shoulders slumping. "Sinus tachycardia. It's weak, but it's there." "Get him to the OR," Smith ordered, breathless. "He's got a lacerated femoral artery and likely internal bleeding from the takedown. I want him prepped in 5 minutes. O'Connor." Madeline flinched. Smith turned to her, his eyes blazing with a mixture of adrenaline and fury. "You're done for the night," he hissed. "You stepped way out of your lane. You endangered yourself. You interfered with a violent patient, and you engaged in—" He waved his hand at the room. Whatever psychodrama that was. "Go to the break room and stay there until risk management comes down. Do not leave the hospital." He's a veteran, Madeline said, her voice trembling but defiant. He was having a flashback. You were triggering him. He's a junkie with a knife who almost killed my head of security, Smith countered. I don't care if he's General Patton. You don't whisper sweet nothings to a man holding a weapon. Get out of my trauma bay. They wheeled the gurney past her, as they did. Caleb's hand, limp and stained with dried blood, swung off the side of the bed. For a brief second, it brushed against Madeline's scrub pants. She looked at his face as he passed. The oxygen mask fogged up with his shallow breaths. He looked so young now, stripped of the rage. He looked like Michael. Madeline didn't go to the break room. She watched the elevator doors close on the surgical team, carrying the only link to her dead brother away from her. She needed answers. Michael had died in a training accident in Germany. That was the official report. Closed casket. No autopsy allowed due to severe tissue damage. The family had buried a box that weighed 180 pounds. But Madeline had always known, with the twin sisters' intuition, that the story was a lie. And now, a man with the unit's secret brand and the classified code phrase had just stumbled into her ER, screaming about an ambush in a valley thousands of miles from Germany. She walked to the nurse's station, ignoring the stares of her colleagues. Brenda, Madeline said, her voice low. I need his personal effects. Brenda looked up from her charting. She looked tired. Maddie, Smith is on the warpath. If I give you that bag, I'm an accessory. Please, Madeline begged. He knows Michael. Brenda froze. She knew the story of Michael. Everyone at St. Margaret's did. They knew how Madeline had grieved, how she had taken a leave of absence, how she had never quite been the same sunny nurse she was before 2009. Brenda looked left, then right. She reached under the counter and pulled out a clear plastic patient belongings bag. You have 5 minutes before the cops come to log it into evidence. He had no ID, just the clothes on his back and this. Madeline grabbed the bag and ducked into the supply closet. Her hand shook as she opened it. Inside were muddy combat boots, torn jeans, a flannel shirt soaked in blood, and a small, leather-bound notebook. She opened the notebook. It was wet, the pages swollen with water and blood. Most of the ink had run, turning the pages into Rorschach tests of blue and black. But the last few pages were written in ballpoint pen, the indentations deep, as if written in a hurry. October 14th, they are following me. The grey sedan. Same one from DC. I can't go to the VA. They have eyes there. Michael was right. The cash is real. They didn't burn it. I have to find his sister. Chicago. Madeline gasped, dropping the notebook. I have to find his sister. He hadn't come to St. Margaret's by accident. The car crash wasn't random. He was coming for her. Suddenly, the door to the supply closet was thrown open. Madeline shoved the notebook into the waistband of her scrubs, hiding it under her shirt just as a shadow fell over her. It wasn't Dr. Smith. Standing there was a man she had never seen before. He was wearing a wet trench coat over a suit that cost more than her yearly salary. He was holding a badge, but he put it away before she could read the agency name. Nurse O'Connor, the man asked. His voice was smooth, cultured, and utterly terrifying. Yes. Madeline pressed her back against the shelves of saline bags. I'm Agent Harrison. I'm here for the patient in bed 4. We've been tracking him. He's a fugitive from a military mental health facility. Dangerous. Paranoid. Harrison stepped into the small closet, invading her space. He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. Did he say anything to you before he lost consciousness? Did he give you anything? Madeline's hand brushed the notebook, hidden against her skin. She looked at Harrison's shoes. They were dry. It was pouring rain outside, and he had just arrived. Yet his shoes were dry. He hadn't come in through the front. He had been in the hospital already, waiting. No, Madeline lied. He just screamed about the perimeter. Harrison stared at her for a long moment, studying her pupils, her pulse in her neck. If he gave you anything, Nurse O'Connor, it's infected. Contagious, you might say. It could make you very sick. He turned and walked away. Madeline waited until his footsteps faded. She pulled the notebook out. Her hands were trembling so hard she almost dropped it again. She wasn't just a nurse anymore. She was a target. The fluorescent lights of the hospital administration boardroom hummed with an irritating buzz that felt like a drill into Madeline's skull. She sat at the end of a long mahogany table. At the head sat Dr. Alistair Kavanagh, the chief of medicine, a man whose primary concern was usually donor retention and lawsuit avoidance. To his right was Dr. Smith, still in his scrubs, looking vindicated. To his left was a woman from legal, typing furiously on a laptop. "Let me get this straight," Kavanagh said, peering over his spectacles. "You entered a locked trauma bay against the direct orders of the attending physician. You engaged a violent, psychotic patient without security backup, and you whispered to him." "I de-escalated the situation," Madeline said, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. "He was in a PTSD crisis. Doctor, Smith's approach of shouting and rushing him was exacerbating the threat. He would have killed someone. He was a split second away from stabbing me." Smith slammed his hand on the table. "Because you distracted him, you played into his delusion. I utilized a grounding technique," Madeline argued. "He responded to it. He dropped the weapon. The only reason he attacked was because you and the guard rushed him before he was fully secured. You used a code," the woman from legal said, looking up. "The security footage has audio. You said, 'The shadow does not fear the dark.'" "That's not a standard medical grounding technique. Ms. O'Connor. That sounds like a password." Madeline swallowed. She couldn't tell them. If she told them about the unit, about Michael, about the notebook burning a hole in her pocket, they would think she was crazy too, or worse. Harrison would find out. "It's a phrase from a book," she improvised. "A mantra. I recognized his tattoo. I knew he was a ranger. It's common among that battalion." "It's weird," Smith spat, "and it's reckless. Alistair, she's a liability. We have a patient in the ICU who is currently under police guard because of her interference. I want her license reviewed." Kavanagh sighed, rubbing his temples. "Madeline, you've been with us for 12 years. You have a spotless record. But this is bizarre behavior. And with the police involvement—" "Police," Madeline interrupted. "Is he under arrest?" "Not the Chicago PD," Kavanagh said, looking uncomfortable. "Federal agents took jurisdiction about 20 minutes ago. They've locked down the ICU floor. Nobody goes in or out without their clearance. Not even me." Madeline's blood ran cold. Harrison, he had moved fast. "They are claiming he is a matter of national security," Kavanagh continued. "They are preparing to transfer him to a military facility as soon as he is stable enough to move. Likely within the hour." "You can't let them take him," Madeline blurted out, standing up. The room went silent. "Excuse me." Smith laughed in disbelief. "We can't let them. They're the federal government." "Madeline, he's their soldier." "He's in critical condition," Madeline argued, desperation creeping into her voice. "He just came out of surgery. If they move him now, he'll hemorrhage. It's a death sentence." "That is not your call," Kavanaugh said firmly. "Sit down. Ms. O'Connor." Madeline didn't sit. She realized with sudden clarity that the hospital wasn't a sanctuary. It was a processing center. They were going to hand Caleb over to the people he was running from, and he would die in the back of a black van. And the secret of what happened to Michael would die with him. "I need to check his vitals," Madeline said, turning toward the door. "You are suspended. Effective immediately," Kavanaugh barked. "If you go near that patient, I will have you escorted out by security, and I will press trespassing charges." Madeline stopped at the door. She looked back at the three of them bureaucrats and egoists who had no idea that a war was being fought in their elevators and hallways. "Do what you have to do," Madeline said softly. "But check the visitor logs. That agent, Harrison, he didn't sign in at the front desk, and he was here before the ambulance arrived." She walked out before they could respond. She didn't go to her locker. She didn't leave the building. She went to the laundry chute in the utility hallway. She knew the hospital better than the architects. She knew that the laundry chute on the administration floor dropped down to the basement linen room, and she knew that the basement linen room had a service elevator that bypassed the lobby and went straight to the ICU supply corridor. It was insane. It was something out of a movie. It was something Michael would have done. Madeline O'Connor, a 42-year-old nurse who liked gardening and classical music, climbed into the laundry chute and slid into the darkness. 30 minutes later, the ICU corridor was silent, but it wasn't empty. Two men in suits stood outside, room 402. They weren't police. They stood with feet shoulder-width apart, hands clasped in front of them. Military stance. Madeline watched from around the corner, peeking through the small window of the dirty utility room where she had emerged, smelling of bleach and soiled sheets. She needed a distraction. She needed to get into that room before they moved him. She looked around the utility room. Cleaning chemicals, mops, a fire alarm panel. Pulling the fire alarm would lock down the elevators, but it would also bring the real fire department and more security. It would cause chaos. Chaos is cover, Michael had written in one of his letters. Madeline reached for the red handle, but then she stopped. If she pulled the alarm, the doors would magnetically seal. She wouldn't be able to get in the room. She needed a different kind of distraction. She looked at her phone. She dialed the front desk of the ER. "Emergency department. This is Brenda. Brenda, listen to me," Madeline whispered. "Don't ask questions. Call the ICU nursing station. Tell them you just got a call from the blood bank. Tell them the blood units sent up for John Doe in 402 are mismatched. Tell them it's a transfusion reaction waiting to happen. Tell them to stop the infusion now." "Maddie, where are you? Everyone is looking for you. Just do it. Brenda. A man's life depends on it. Please." "For Michael?" There was a pause, a long, heavy silence. "Okay," Brenda whispered. "Okay." Madeline hung up and waited. 30 seconds later, the nurse inside the glass-walled ICU station grabbed the phone. Her face went pale. She slammed the phone down and ran toward room 402, shouting at the men in suits. "Get out of the way, we have a medical emergency. Wrong blood type." The suits hesitated. They were trained to deal with threats, not medical malpractice. They stepped aside as the nurse burst into the room. Madeline seized the moment. As the suits turned their heads to watch the nurse, Madeline slipped out of the utility room. She didn't run running, drew the eye. She walked fast, holding a clipboard she'd grabbed from the supply room, keeping her head down. She walked right past the suits, muttering, "Pharmacy, stat delivery," and slipped into the room behind the nurse. The room was dim. The monitor was beeping rhythmically. The nurse was frantically checking the blood bag hanging on the IV pole. "It's O negative," the nurse muttered, confused. "It's universal. What is Brenda talking about?" "She's talking about a diversion," Madeline said, locking the door behind her and jamming a chair under the handle. The nurse spun around. "Maddie, what are you doing? You're suspended." "Selina, I need you to trust me," Madeline said, moving to the bed. "These men outside, they aren't here to help him. They're here to finish what they started." "You've lost your mind," Selina whispered, backing away. "I'm calling security. Look at his chart." Madeline pointed at the patient. "Look at the toxicology report from admission. Did you run it?" Selina hesitated. "Yes. It was clean." "No," Madeline said. "Look closer. Look at the trace elements." Selina frowned and tapped the computer screen. "Elevated cortisol, mild anemia." "Wait." She squinted. "What is scopolamine doing in his system?" "Devil's breath," Madeline said grimly. "It makes you suggestible. It makes you compliant. Or, in high doses, it makes you hallucinate. He wasn't drunk, Selina, and he wasn't just having PTSD. He was drugged. Someone was trying to break his mind." Selina looked from the screen to Madeline, terror dawning in her eyes. Who did this?" "The men outside," Madeline said. "Now, help me disconnect him from the monitor. We're leaving. Leaving he's on a ventilator." "We're going to bag him," Madeline said, grabbing the ambu bag. "We're taking him to the old MRI suite in the basement. The one under construction. No cameras. No signal. They'll break that door down in 10 seconds, Selina said, her voice shaking. "Then we better be fast," Madeline said. Suddenly, the doorknob rattled violently, then a heavy thud. They were ramming it. Caleb's eyes flew open. He didn't scream this time. He looked straight at Madeline. His eyes were clear. The anesthesia was wearing off, or maybe the adrenaline was cutting through it. "Code black," he rasped, the tube in his throat muffling the sound. Madeline leaned over him. "I've got you. Caleb, we're moving." The door frame splintered. A hand reached through the gap, grasping for the chair leg. "Code black," Caleb repeated, his eyes locking onto the vent in the ceiling. Madeline looked up. The vent. It was wide enough for a person. "Selina," Madeline said, "help me lift him." "To the vent. Are you insane?" "We're not going to the vent," Madeline said, grabbing a scalpel from the bedside table. "We're going to make them think we went to the vent." The door cracked open with a deafening crash. The door to room 402 didn't open. It exploded inward. The lock mechanism shattered under the force of a battering ram, sending splinters of wood and twisted metal flying across the linoleum. Two men in tactical gear, faces obscured by visors, surged into the room. Weapons raised compact submachine guns that had no place in a civilian hospital. "Clear left," one shouted. "Clear right." The other barked. Agent Harrison strolled in behind them, stepping delicately over the debris of the doorframe. He adjusted his cuffs, his eyes scanning the room with the predatory patience of a shark. The room was empty. The bed was stripped. The monitor was disconnected, its screen dark. The IV pole was knocked over, a bag of saline dripping onto the floor like a slow, rhythmic clock. "Room is clear, sir," one of the tactical officers said, lowering his weapon. "They're gone." Harrison didn't speak. He walked to the center of the room and spun slowly in a circle. There was nowhere to hide. The bathroom door was wide open. The curtains were pulled back. Then he looked up. The ventilation grate above the bed had been pried loose. It hung by a single screw, swinging slightly in the draft. A white bedsheet had been tied into a crude rope, knotted around the sprinkler pipe, dangling into the open vent shaft. Harrison smiled, a thin, cruel expression. "Amateurs," he whispered. They went into the ceiling plenum, secure the perimeter, seal the HVAC exits on the roof and the basement, pump tear gas into the system. "Sir," the officer hesitated. "This is a hospital. The gas will circulate to the pediatric ward." Harrison turned to look at the man. His eyes were dead, void of any empathy. "Did I stutter? The target is a biological weapon carrier. That is the cover story. If a few sick kids get a cough, it's collateral damage. Seal the vents." The men rushed out. Harrison took one last look at the swinging grate, satisfied that his prey was trapped in the metal intestines of the building. He was wrong. Madeline was not in the ceiling. She was in the walls. Hospitals are living organisms, breathing through massive networks of pipes, wires, and ducts. Between the pristine walls of the patient rooms and the hallways lies the interstitial space, narrow, dirty, service corridors used by maintenance crews to access the medical gas lines and plumbing. Madeline and Selina were dragging Caleb's limp body on a canvas transfer sheet through a crawl space that smelled of dust, copper, and rat poison. "My arms," Selina gasped, her face streaked with grime. "Maddie, I can't pull anymore." "We have to," Madeline whispered, her voice ragged. "We're almost to the riser." The trick in room 402 had been Caleb's idea, mumbled through the fog of anesthesia. The code black wasn't a blackout. It was the black void, the space behind the headwall unit where the oxygen and suction pipes ran. The panel popped off with a simple latch if you knew where to press. The vent in the ceiling had been a decoy, a classic misdirection Caleb had set up while Madeline and Selina shoved him through the wall panel into the service chase. It had taken them less than 40 seconds to vanish. Caleb groaned, his head lolling against the concrete floor. The movement was tearing his stitches. A dark stain was spreading across the abdominal binder they had hastily wrapped around him. "He's bleeding through," Selina whispered, shining her phone's flashlight on his stomach. "Maddie, he needs a surgeon. We're killing him. If we go back, they kill him," Madeline said. "And then they kill us for seeing it." "Who are those people?" Selina sobbed quietly. "The cleanup crew," a rasping voice said from the floor. Caleb's eyes were open. They were glassy, fever-bright, but focused. He reached up, his hand trembling violently, and gripped Madeleine's ankle. "The MRI suite," he choked out. "Faraday cage. Blocks the signal. They're tracking. My blood." Madeline froze. "What nanotracers?" Caleb coughed, a bubble of blood forming on his lip. "In the blood. They injected me. At the facility. Need the magnet. High Tesla. Burns them out." Madeline looked at Selina. The terror in the younger nurse's eyes mirrored her own. They weren't just dealing with a soldier on the run. They were dealing with high-tech experimentation. "The old MRI," Madeline said, her mind racing. "It's in the East Wing basement. It was decommissioned last year, but the magnet is still quenched. It's essentially a giant dead zone." "But the construction crew sealed that wing off," Selina said. Not the service elevator, Madeline said. She grabbed the straps of the transfer sheet. On 3. 1, 2, pull. They dragged him through the darkness, inch by painful inch, while above them, the sounds of heavy boots thudded against the floorboards, hunting for ghosts in the ventilation shafts. The decommissioned MRI suite was a tomb of silence. The massive, donut-shaped machine loomed in the center of the room like a dormant cyclops. The walls were lined with copper shielding to prevent radio frequency interference, making the room a perfect dead zone. No cell signals, no Wi-Fi. And, if Caleb was right, no tracker signals. Madeline and Selina had managed to lift Caleb onto the plastic gurney that had been left behind. He was unconscious again, his body shutting down from the strain. Selina was huddled in the corner, monitoring his pulse manually because the electronic equipment in the room was dead. Pulse is thready. 110 beats per minute. BP is dropping. Keep him warm, Madeline ordered. She ripped open a package of emergency thermal blankets she'd grabbed from the crash cart before the escape. She turned away from the patient and pulled the soggy, blood-stained notebook from her pocket. Her hands shook as she laid it on the metal counter. This was it. The reason her life had imploded in the span of 3 hours. The reason Michael was dead. She peeled back the wet pages. The ink was smeared, but the pressure of the pen had left indentations she could read if she held it at an angle to the emergency light. November 2009, Pesh Valley. Target code. Name Viper. Intel says Viper is a high-level Taliban commander, moving heroin to fund IEDs. Mission capture or kill. Madeline turned the page. November 12th, 0300 hours. We have eyes on Viper. He's meeting with someone. Not Taliban. Westerners. Suits. Michael is on the scope. I'm spotting. Michael says, that's not a commander. That's an asset. We verify. The target is a CIA intermediary. He's paying the warlords, not fighting them. We stumbled onto a payroll meeting. Madeline's breath hitched. She remembered Michael's voice on the phone that last time. It's all grey. Maddie, there are no good guys here. She turned the page. The handwriting became jagged, angry. Command orders the shot. They want the meeting erased. No witnesses, including the suits. Michael refuses. I'm not shooting a civilian. I'm not shooting a friendly. Radio goes silent. Then a new voice. Shadow 1, this is Overwatch. Execute the order, or you are considered compromised. Michael drops the mag. He stands up. That's when the drone hit. Madeline gasped, covering her mouth. The official report said Michael had stepped on an IED during a patrol. They called in a hellfire on our own position, to wipe the slate, to bury the payroll. I was blown clear. Michael took the main impact. He was still alive when I got to him. He gave me the book. He told me to run. He said, tell Maddie. Tell her the shadow fears the light. Tears streamed down Madeline's face, hot and fast. They had murdered him, her baby brother, the boy who used to rescue stray cats and cry when he stepped on a snail. The government he served had dropped a missile on him because he refused to murder a witness. He didn't die instantly, a voice whispered from the gurney. Madeline spun around. Caleb was awake. He was looking at her, his eyes filled with a decade of torture. He made me promise, Caleb rasped, to find you, to give you the list. The list. Madeline stepped closer, clutching the notebook. The last page, Caleb said. The names, the men who were on the radio, the men who ordered the strike. Madeline flipped to the back of the notebook. There was a list of 5 names. 1. General A. R. Vance 2. Director S. K. Smith 3. Agent T. Harrison Madeline froze. She reread the second name. Director S. K. Smith. Smith, she whispered. Doctor. Smith. His brother. Caleb coughed. Senator Smith. The Oversight Committee. And the third name. Harrison, Madeline said, the bile rising in her throat. The man upstairs. He was the handler, Caleb said. He gave the order. He's been hunting me ever since I crawled out of that crater. They put me in a hole, a black site, pumped me full of drugs to make me forget. But I didn't forget. I counted the cracks in the ceiling. I recited the code. He tried to sit up, but groaned and fell back. They aren't here for me, Madeline, Caleb said, his voice urgent. They're here for the book. As long as that book exists, their careers are over. They go to prison for war crimes, treason. That's why Harrison is here personally, Madeline realized. He's cleaning up his own mess. Suddenly, the heavy lead-lined door of the MRI suite shuddered. Clang. Someone was outside. Selina jumped, dropping the stethoscope. They found us. How did they find us? They didn't, Caleb whispered. They're sweeping the grid. They're checking every room. We need to block the door, Madeline said, looking around, but there was nothing heavy enough to stop a tactical team. The MRI machine was bolted down. The cabinets were flimsy aluminum. No, Caleb said. He reached for his waistband and pulled out a small, metallic object he had swiped from the trauma bay during the initial struggle. It wasn't a weapon. It was a canister of liquid oxygen, a small, portable tank. Help me up, Caleb commanded. The command voice was back. The soldier was back. You can't stand, Selina cried. Get me to the magnet, Caleb roared, swinging his legs off the table. Blood soaked through his bandages or dripping onto the floor. Madeline grabbed his left arm, Selina his right. They hauled him toward the gaping maw of the MRI machine. What are you doing? Madeline screamed. The magnet, Caleb gritted out. It's off. But the quench pipe. The helium release. He pointed to a valve on the wall behind the machine. If we breach that valve, the liquid helium expands. It displaces the oxygen. It freezes the room. That will kill us, Selina shrieked. No, Caleb said, leaning against the machine, his face grey. The pressure wave. It blows the door out. It creates a diversion, and the fog, thick white fog, total cover. We run in the chaos. It's suicide, Madeline said. Staying here is suicide, Caleb said. He looked at the door. The handle was turning. A drill was whining, boring through the lock. Do you trust me? Caleb looked at Madeline. It was the same look Michael used to give her before he did something stupid. Madeline looked at the notebook in her hand. The evidence of her brother's murder. The reason he died. Yes, she said. Get behind the console. Caleb ordered. Shield your eyes. He grabbed the heavy oxygen tank. He wasn't going to turn the valve. He was going to smash it. The door flew open. Harrison stood there, flanked by 3 men. He smiled when he saw them. End of the line. Sergeant, Harrison drawled, raising a silenced pistol. Nurse O'Connor, hand over the book, and you might survive the night. Caleb didn't hesitate. He didn't monologue. He swung the oxygen tank with every ounce of strength he had left, smashing it against the release valve of the quench pipe. Crack. For a split second, there was silence. Then, a sound like a jet engine erupted in the small room. Caleb swung the heavy oxygen tank, smashing the MRI machine's quench valve, The reaction was catastrophic. Liquid helium boiled instantly, expanding 700 times its volume. A wall of freezing white fog erupted, blasting the heavy door off its hinges and sending Harrison's men reeling, choking on the displaced oxygen. "Move!" Caleb roared, dragging Madeline and Selena into the blinding mist. They scrambled through the freezing haze, the thermal shock rendering Harrison's tactical gear useless. Under the cover of the artificial cloud, they stumbled up the emergency stairs, bursting into the main lobby of St. Margaret's. The cavernous space was filled with patients and families. "Call the police!" Madeline screamed, blooded and covered in frost. "Real police, not the feds." Harrison emerged from the stairwell, his weapon raised. "Federal agents!" he bellowed, freezing the room. "That man is a terrorist carrying a biological agent. Everyone down." The crowd panicked, but Madeline stood firm, shielding the collapsing Caleb. She pulled the waterlogged notebook from her pocket and held it high. "He's lying. This is the proof Operation Black Viper, ordered by Director Smith to cover up a heroin ring." Harrison leveled his silencer at her chest. "Drop the book. O'Connor." Suddenly, the elevator pinged. "Doctor." Tobias Smith stepped out, freezing at the sight of the gunman. "Tobias," Madeline shouted. "Your brother signed the kill order. Look at it." She threw the notebook across the polished floor. It slid to the doctor's feet. "Don't touch it!" Harrison screamed, swinging his aim toward the chief of surgery. Tobias hesitated, then picked up the book. He saw the handwriting. He saw his brother's signature authorizing the strike on Michael's unit. The arrogance drained from his face, replaced by horror. "Give me the evidence, Doctor!" Harrison hissed. Tobias looked at the phones in the crowd, live streaming the standoff to thousands. He looked at Harrison, then stepped between the gun and Madeline. "No," Tobias said, his voice shaking but loud. "You aren't here for a virus. You're here to clean up a murder." Sirens wailed outside, red and blue lights flooding the glass walls. The Chicago PD swarmed the entrance. Harrison lowered his weapon, realizing the darkness had finally been breached. By dawn, the story had broken worldwide. Senator Smith was in handcuffs, and the O'Connor Ledger was the top story on every network. Caleb was stable in the ICU, guarded by honest officers. Outside the ER, Tobias sat beside Madeline on a bench. "I didn't do it for you," he admitted quietly. "I did it because I didn't want to be a monster like him." He walked away, leaving Madeline alone with the sunrise. She closed her eyes, feeling a warm breeze. The shadow does not fear the dark, she thought, and in the silence of her heart, she finally felt Michael answer. For we are the night. The war was over. She was home. And that is the story of Madeline O'Connor and the code that brought down an empire. It's a reminder that sometimes the bravest soldiers aren't the ones holding the guns, but the ones holding the truth. Madeline risked her career and her life to save a stranger because she recognized the pain in his eyes. She proved that loyalty isn't just a military term, it's a human one. In a world full of noise, she listened to the whispers of the past and changed the future. The notebook became a symbol of resistance, proving that even the darkest secrets can be brought to light if just one person refuses to look away. What would you have done in Madeline's shoes? Would you have walked into that room? Let me know in the comments below. If this story moved you, please hit that like button. It really helps the channel, and subscribe for more true-to-life dramas. Don't forget to ring the bell so you never miss a story. Thanks for watching.